It was an old truth whispered like wind through pine. A female alpha without fortune was assumed to be searching, not for joy, but for a contract. I wore that rumor like a second cloak as I stood before my council. Elder Blackwell's voice was steady as a metronome, his weathered hands folded over parchment. "The elders have met," he said. "We have excellent news, Alpha. Victor Holloway has agreed to become your mate." The chamber smelled of beeswax and old maps. I kept my face smooth, my pulse even. 3 months remained on the deadline that hung above my pack like a winter moon. 3 months to secure a bond or open our borders to challenge. I looked at the elders who had helped raise me, and I heard the hush of my mother's name moving through the rafters. "How generous," I answered softly. "A beta willing to mate an alpha. The sacrifices he makes." The sarcasm missed him. It always did. "We strongly advise acceptance," he said. "Victor serves under Derek Westwood. Their protection alone, I know what their protection means." I tapped one finger against the armrest, then stilled it. Lineage pressed like a ring around my ribs. Tradition liked its wolves in familiar shapes, and I was the wrong silhouette. Still, I said the words my pack needed. "Send word." "I accept." I left the chamber with a straight spine and a quiet ache. In the corridor's dim light, I let a single breath tremble out of me. Female alphas mated to survive. Male alphas mated to expand. I had been born with teeth and a title, yet somehow it was never quite enough. That evening, the Westwood estate glittered like frost. Music drifted under chandeliers, and rain from earlier left the gardens breathing green and clean. Wolves from every old name crossed the marble in shining currents. I moved among them, my dress a simple grey silk that felt like clear thought. Victor met me with a smile practiced for portraits. His compliments were polite, his promises efficient, and then, careless as men who imagine they cannot be corrected, he mentioned a mistress he intended to keep. He spoke it lightly, as if it were a minor clause, the way one might note the weather or the wine. Conversation thinned to a listening hush. I kept my hands loose at my sides. "So I may take lovers as well?" I asked, gentle as a falling leaf. "Of course not," he said, almost laughing. "We wouldn't raise a bastard in an alpha's house." The words slid across the floor like ice. I set my glass down to keep my temper clean. "Then this arrangement won't suit either of us," I said, and I turned away before pride could turn sharp. I aimed for the terrace doors and the square of night beyond. The room shifted around me without my notice, people giving way, a current I had not earned here, and I collided with a man rounding the corner, his forearm balancing 2 goblets of red. The impact was soft, the stain was not. Crimson opened over grey silk like a small, surprised flower. "I'm sorry," he said at once. The voice was low and unhurried, the apology simple. In my defense, the wine jumped. A laugh tried to escape me. I caught it. "It's only silk," I murmured. "It's a 1982 on you," he replied, mouth tipping, "which some might call an upgrade." I looked up and met eyes the color of clear winter. He was not the largest man in the room, but some rooms bend all the same. The hair at his temples refused perfect order, a detail that made him look more human than rumor allowed. Recognition followed a heartbeat later, traveling my spine like a chill that wasn't unpleasant. Derek Westwood. The signature that steadied borders. The alpha who could tilt a treaty with a raised brow. Before I could decide whether to be annoyed or amused, Victor appeared, color high, voice tight. "Lyra, don't make a scene," he hissed, and inclined his head toward the man with the wine. "Apologize to my alpha." "My alpha?" I repeated, mild as mist. Derek's attention shifted, not sharp, not dull, simply present. "Victor," he said in greeting, and the single word reset the air. He offered me one of the glasses he had saved from disaster. "For the dress," he added. "For the truth," I said, and did not take it. The circle had grown. Polite eyes, greedy ears. I kept my voice quiet enough not to rattle the crystal. "I wish you joy of your mistress," I told Victor, "and I wish myself quiet." He reached for my wrist, careless, familiar. I slipped free with a precise turn that made no sound, only that small intake of breath from the onlookers. Derek did not step in, did not perform, only watched with a stillness that felt like respect. I left them and the heat of the ballroom behind. The doors surrendered to my hands. Night rolled over my shoulders, cool and kind. The terraces smelled of stone and wet ivy. Beyond the balustrade, the gardens shone in their rain dark, and the fountains kept their soft talk with the moon. I rested my palms on the warm stone and let the music drift smaller. My wolf lifted her head under my skin, listening to old things, the hush of cedars, the quiet arithmetic of distance and wind. Somewhere in that hush, I understood that I had broken the last, frail option the elders had arranged, and that I did not regret it. Footsteps approached and stopped where courtesy would stop them. I didn't turn. His presence was like standing in a patch of sunlight on a cold day. You feel it before you name it. You were right, he said after a moment, voice quieter now. About the truth. The night is honest with everyone, I answered. The balustrade held steady under my hands. It makes us all small enough to see. He came to stand beside me, but kept a shoulder's distance. The wine curled warm in the air between us. Up close, he smelled like cedar, and something faintly metallic, as if a storm had been in his pocket and he'd forgotten to put it down. I wondered whether the stories about him were heavy to carry, or if he wore them like a coat meant for weather I did not know. The council gave me a clock, I said, surprising myself. 3 months and not much mercy packed into them. Clocks can be moved, he said. Or broken. I've broken enough for one evening. We listened to the fountains together, and a fox slipped along the hedge like a small arrow of shadow. The clouds parted an inch, and the moon found our balcony, laying a quiet stripe of light across the stone. In that pale wash I could feel it, that odd widening inside my ribcage, the sense of a path opening where there had been only wall. I did not reach for it. I let it breathe, Lyra, he said softly, like a name he was weighing. I looked at him then, finally meeting those winter eyes in the gentler light. The party was far away. The gardens smelled of clean earth. Everything in me that was wolf recognized something it could not explain and did not fear. For a long breath we said nothing at all. The night held. The moon was kind, and somewhere in the pines, an old promise turned over and settled, as if it had just chosen a place to sleep. The night wrapped itself around the terrace like a shawl, quiet and cool, and for a moment I forgot the clock inside my chest. Derek didn't crowd me. He simply stood within reach, letting the fountains do most of the talking. It was oddly considerate for a man the world called dangerous. You handled him, he said at last. A hint of praise under the words. I prefer not to be handled, I answered. A smile brushed his mouth, then went still, as if careful not to startle something delicate between us. The rain-slick hedges glimmered. A fox cut a silver line through the grass. That tug beneath my skin returned, gentle as a tide pulling shoreward. It was not a bond, not yet, only awareness. Like heat near a fire I hadn't decided to sit beside. Inside, a ripple of commotion reminded us the ballroom still spun without us. Derek turned his head, listening as if the house were breathing. He won't leave it alone, he murmured. Victor? I asked, though I already knew. He imagines a scene is a ladder. Derek's gaze found mine again. He forgets ladders have rungs that break. I'm tired of climbing other people's ladders, I said. The words came out softer than I expected. Then don't, he said. Let them climb to you. It should have sounded arrogant. It felt like permission. We went back in because duty has a voice that never sleeps. Music unfolded itself around us. Piano, low strings, laughter stitched into velvet. The lights were kinder than memory, candle glow in crystal, 1,000 tiny moons. I could feel eyes trying my name on their tongues. Victor stood near the orchestra, red-faced and glossy, his anger tucked into a smile that didn't hold. He looked me over, gaze sticking on the stain. You're becoming an expert at making entrances, he said. And exits. Practice, I replied. He stepped closer, forgetting the room again. He always forgot the room. Derek didn't move, but the air near my shoulder seemed to thicken, as if the house had drawn one deep breath and held it. Apologize to Alpha Westwood, Victor said to me, voice pitched for an audience. You've embarrassed our families enough for one night. Then let's end the night, I told him. Before we collect more, his hand twitched toward my wrist. He caught himself, remembering at last that he was being watched by people whose opinions he borrowed for courage. He smoothed his lapel instead. "Be sensible, Lyra." "She is," Derek said mildly. He hadn't raised his voice, but conversations near us softened as if the room wished to hear more clearly. "Why don't you give us a moment?" Victor flushed darker, then flashed his practiced smile to no one in particular. He stepped back 2 paces that felt like something else entirely. I felt no triumph, only a steadier inhale. Derek didn't touch me. He offered his arm to the air, a courtesy left in the doorway. "There's a dressing room down the corridor," he said. "Silk and red wine rarely become friends." "Neither do alphas and orders," I said. "Luckily, I brought neither tonight." The corner of his mouth tipped again. "Only options." I should have said no. Instead, I followed the quiet of him away from the music, past portraits that watched with tired eyes. The dressing room waited with its own small weather, lamplight, soft chairs, mirrors standing like patient trees. On the rack, gowns shimmered in twilight colors, each one a different sort of courage. "I didn't ask for this," I told him. "I know." He leaned his shoulder to the doorframe, not entering, as if stepping over that line would be a promise he wasn't ready to make. "I thought you might like a choice that doesn't include swallowing your pride." "Thoughtful of you," I said, wary of kindness. "It had strings as often as silk did." "No strings," he said, reading the worry I hadn't voiced. "Threads, maybe?" "Threads? The kind you feel when something's meant to be tied, but only if both hands agree." The words slid under my ribs. I turned to the gowns to keep from looking at his mouth when he spoke like that. Midnight blue, river green, a black that drank the lamplight and returned it as a hum. I chose the blue because it reminded me of clear shade, and because the fabric was cool against fingers that had held themselves still too long. Behind the screen, I stripped the ruined grey and stood a breath in my own skin. The house was quiet on this side of the door, the storm smell of him faint as cedar after rain. I listened for my wolf and found her steady. When I stepped out, he didn't look first at the neckline or the fall of the skirt. His eyes found my face, as if it were a place he recognized from an old map. "Better," he said softly, "or simply different." I countered. Sometimes that's the same thing. He had removed his gloves while I changed. A line of healing cut crossed his palm, faintly pink against tan. Old stories of blood and bargains stirred uneasily. I made my expression smooth. He noticed the glance, the way alphas notice the shift of weight in a room. "It's nothing," he said, and it sounded like a truth meant to protect rather than inform. "Everyone keeps telling me what's nothing," I said. "Eventually the room will be empty." His eyes warmed a degree. "You're not easy to distract." "Practice," I said again. But I felt the smallest curve of my own mouth. A maid slipped in and out like a breeze, leaving a small velvet box on the table. A simple bracelet of onyx and moonstone, night and moon in a circle. I lifted it. It was cool and heavier than it looked. "For teeth and politics," Derek said, as if answering a question I had not asked. "Stone remembers things silk forgets." "Promises," I said, and the room tilted toward quiet. "One," he agreed. He didn't reach for the bracelet. He offered his wrist instead, the way wolves present the vulnerable first when they mean to show faith. I weighed the feeling that rose. Then I fastened the stones around my own wrist, slow enough to make a choice of it. "Not yet," I told him. His breath left on a laugh that wasn't entirely a laugh. "Not yet," he echoed, and in the echo was a relief I felt echo back through my bones. We didn't return to the crowd at once. We let the silence be useful. He told me, in that low, even voice, about a hill north of the estate where the pines kept their own weather, mist on summer mornings, snow that fell like thought. He said when the wind moved right, you could hear the river decide to become a waterfall. I told him, without meaning to offer so much, about the ridge above my packlands, where the wolves taught their young to test the edge of speed. We didn't say anything about contracts or clocks. We spoke the language our kind uses when we are not yet brave enough for the other words. "What is it you want?" he asked finally. "Not what the council wanted, not what the borders demanded. You." The truth sat in my mouth and asked for water. I gave it the smallest sip. I want to sleep without counting what can be taken, I said. I want a season without bargaining for it. The muscles at his jaw eased, like a wolf being told the worst path was behind them. I can't promise seasons, he said, but I can promise not to take. The bar is low, I said, but my throat went soft. Then let me raise it. He straightened, as if a decision had settled into his bones. You need a mate to quiet the old men and their rules. I need, he paused as if listening to something far off, an ally the world can't buy. You know me an hour, I said. I know the way you left the room standing taller than when you entered it. I know the way the night steadied when you stepped into it. I know enough to ask for another hour. Just an hour? For tonight, he said. Then another. And we'll see what we build from small stones. It was not a proposal. It was an opening. Safer than love, braver than strategy. My wolf paced once, then lay down with her chin on her paws, ears up. An hour, I said, and we left the little lamplit grove together. We didn't return to Victor. We found a quiet balcony above the gardens, where the music floated rather than pressed. I leaned my forearms on warm stone. He stood a patient step away, hands loose, eyes on the silvered hedges. Look, he murmured. A deer ghosted the edge of the lawn, delicate as breath, then vanished into the darker trees. For a while, neither of us spoke. My heartbeat matched the far fountain. The bracelet cooled against my skin until it found my temperature. The moon went on doing its old work, painting and forgiving in the same light. I won't let him touch you, Derek said finally, almost absent, as if promising himself a way to live. At least not here. Not in my house. You won't always be nearby, I said. Then teach me where to be, he answered. And I will be there. It was the closest thing to a vow I'd heard all night. Small, human-sized, easy to keep. My shoulders lowered by a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When the hour ended, we drifted apart the way mist lifts from grass. Quiet, without tugging. I found my room in the guest wing, opened the windows to let the pine cool in, and lay down on sheets that still remembered sun. The bracelet's weight became familiar, like a hand I chose to keep. Somewhere down the corridor, the party softened into a lullaby of forks and far laughter. I turned toward the window, watched the moon silver the edge of a cloud, and let the night fold over me. The last thing I felt before sleep was that gentle thread again, patient as tide, waiting where I'd left it. Dawn found the estate wrapped in gauze. Mist lay across the lawns, like a quiet animal, breathing in the same slow rhythm as the pines. I woke to the clean bite of mountain air and the cool weight of moonstone around my wrist. For a few heartbeats I forgot where I was. Then the fountain's far hush threaded the room, and the night arranged itself back into memory. Somewhere down the corridor, footsteps softened, paused, moved on. The house had a careful way of moving, as if it had learned to carry secrets without spilling them. I washed the scent of champagne from my skin and braided my hair, leaving a few strands loose the way my mother had, when she wanted a crown to look accidental. By the time I reached the breakfast terrace, the sun had lifted into a pale coin. Derek was already there, sleeves pushed up, a tea glass sweating in his hand. He looked like a story set aside and then found again in better light. No guards, no entourage, only a stack of paper at his elbow and a small dish of sliced pears. Morning. Lyra Wilder, he said, as if we'd been saying it our entire lives. Morning, I answered, tasting how calmly the words sat between us. His gaze dipped to the bracelet. It suits you, he murmured. It's temporary, I said, though the stone felt less like a loan and more like a promise a river makes to its banks. He didn't argue. He only slid a paper from the stack and turned it so it faced me. This is what your counsel will ask, he said. Lines of succession, patrol coverage, names of witnesses if we formalize anything. The old questions in their old coats. I ate a pear slice to hide a smile. And you already have answers. Some, he said. The honest ones. The terrace rail was warm beneath my palms. Below, gardeners moved through roses still beaded with last night's rain. For a span of quiet, we planned without using the word plan. He would offer border support without touching internal law. I would retain full say over my healers and trackers, no exceptions, no advisors creeping in like ivy. We would speak with my elders together. No closed doors, no whispered amendments. It felt strangely like breathing at a steady pace after running uphill for months. The spell broke when a voice cut through the mild air, too bright for morning. "Alpha Westwood!" "Alpha Wilder." Victor inclined his head by degrees, as if each angle cost him something. He had changed suits and smiles, but the last of last night still clung to him, sour as spilled wine. "You look rested," he said to me, making the word sound like a slight. "Rest is work," I told him. "Some of us are good at both," his mouth tightened. "The council in your little valley must be very proud. Do they know you're shopping for a place in a bigger house?" Derek's chair made the smallest sound as he shifted. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The air learned a new weight. "My pack," I said, letting each word land, "has a house that fits. We're measuring doors, not thrones." Victor's attention slid to Derek. "You'll forgive me if I doubt the purity of intent here, Alpha. You collect rare things." "She's rare. It's simple math. I forgive easily," Derek said, as if the conversation bored him, and that was worse than anger. "But I don't share badly." Victor laughed, short and shiny. "Of course. Enjoy her while she still thinks you're a good bet." He set a card on the table, a small white rectangle that might have been a treaty or a napkin, and walked away with his shoulders thrown back like a man leaving church. I watched the card a moment without touching it. A challenge dressed as an invitation. I had a dozen answers that involved teeth. Instead, I breathed and let the mist on the lawn become a lesson. "Patience has edges sharper than claws. They will test us," I said finally. "They already are," Derek replied, and there was no complaint in it, only a note of readiness, low and steady, like a drum under a march. After breakfast, I took a call from home. Flynn's voice came across the line with the dry humor I'd grown up on and the worry he thought he hid. "You started a little storm, Lyra," he said. "Elder Rowan has polished his lecture notes." "Let him," I said, though my chest tightened. "Are the patrols holding?" "For now." There was a scent push on the north ridge. "No trespass, just a message." He didn't say from whom. He didn't have to. "I'll be back tonight," I told him. "I'm not leaving you to smile at old men alone." He was quiet a moment. "Do you trust him?" he asked. I looked toward the far hedge, where Derek had disappeared to speak with his quartermaster, a shadow moving through dappled shade. I thought of the way he had offered me options instead of orders, the door he didn't cross, the hour he took and did not spend. "I trust what I've seen," I said, "and I'm willing to see more." Flynn exhaled, a sound like a knot easing. "Then hurry." By afternoon, the mist had burned off and the estate wore gold. Derek walked me to the motor court, where an old Land Rover waited, forest-colored and stubborn. He rested his hand on the door, not quite closing it. "I'd like to meet your elders before they decide to hate me in the abstract," he said. "Would they tolerate a visit at dusk?" "They'll tolerate the result," I said, "and they'll remember how they got there." Something like relief softened his shoulders. "I'll bring no one but a driver," he promised. "No cameras. No theater. Tea," I said. "They'll expect tea, and to be respected even when they're wrong. I can do both." His mouth tipped. "I've been practicing. I should have left then." Instead, I found myself saying, "There's a turnout before the switchbacks. If you stop, you can see the whole valley like a map rolled open. It helps to look at it that way. When the elders talk too loud, when the ghosts start editing your decisions." He nodded as if I'd given him a tool. Maybe I had. He reached for the door again, then paused, eyes on the bracelet. "If they ask," he said, "tell them the stones were yours first." "They'll ask," I said. "They always do." The drive down felt shorter than the climb had been. Pines gave way to fir, fir to alder, alder to the stretch of road that knew my tire treads like a friend's face. When the valley opened, my chest did too. The ridge wore its old blue. Smoke rose in thin, hopeful threads from roofs I could name with my eyes closed. The wind brought me the clean musk of my own borders, a scent that settled everything inside me into its proper drawer. Home met me with hands on my shoulders and questions in my ear. Children darted like trout around boots, and Mara pressed a cup of broth into my palm, the way she had when my knees were still scraped. Elder Rowan stood by the long table, spine straight as the staff he leaned on, gaze cool enough to chip. I felt the room arrange itself to watch me. "Alpha," Rowan said, "we hear you've secured attention in high places." "I've secured a meeting in my own kitchen," I said, and set the cup down. "The higher place will come to us at dusk." Murmurs flickered and died. The room smelled of cedar and onion and the soft iron of a sharpening stone. I told them only what mattered. Patrols would be reinforced, borders respected as ours, not absorbed. Healers would keep their freedoms. Young wolves would keep their fasts and their full moons. No silk chains, no price tucked into the bouquet. I saw skepticism sit down beside hope at 3 different tables, and why would a man like that offer so much for so little? Rowan asked because someone always must, because he wants something he can't buy, I said, and let the truth stand without ornaments. Rowan's mouth tightened. He looked at the bracelet, at the small way my fingers had curled around its edge without meaning to. "Be careful what you tie," he said. "Knots remember even when people forget." "I know," I said softly, and I did. When the sun tipped toward the rim of the ridge, I stepped out to the porch. The light gathered in the grass like coins. Distant tires grumbled, then quieted. The Land Rover's brother pulled up beneath the maples, dust settling in a lazy prayer. Derek stepped out alone, a book under one arm, palms open to the air as if arriving unarmed were part of his language. He looked up at my house the way a man looks at a trail he means to respect. I felt my wolf lift her head and listen. "Welcome," I said. "Thank you for having me," he answered, voice pitched to our doorway, not to some invisible crowd. We stood a beat in the gentle wind. He wasn't the most powerful wolf in this moment. He was a guest under my roof. Something in me eased at that, like a latch falling into a trust it remembered from older times. Inside, the table waited with hand-thrown cups and bread that cracked like kindling. Derek set the book between the plates. "Maps," he said simply. "I thought we could draw our promises where the trees already know them." Elder Rowan's eyes flicked to mine. I gave him the smallest nod. We sat, and the first steam from the kettle rose like a blessing. The talk would be long. I could feel it already. A rope we would pull gently from both sides until the center knew it was safe to hold. But outside the windows, dusk folded itself over the valley, patient and blue. I rested my hand on the table's worn edge and let the rhythm of voices become a kind of tide. 1 hour became another. Threads found threads. Stone remembered what silk forgot. When at last we paused, the room exhaled as one body, tired and steadier. Later, when the lamps were low and the night animals took their turns with the earth, I stepped outside again. The ridge had become a simple dark line, clean against the stars. I could still hear Derek's voice in the kitchen, not loud, not small, talking with Rowan about the shape of a winter hunt. It sounded like work worth doing. I leaned against the porch post and let the breeze cool my temples. The bracelet warmed to my skin. Somewhere in the trees, an owl stitched the dark with questions I didn't need to answer yet. I breathed in pine and bread and river. I breathed out the last of the ballroom's heat. Sleep came the way it should come to wolves who have run and argued and chosen and been chosen back. Slow, certain, easy as a door swinging home. By morning, the kitchen smelled of cedar smoke and honey. Sunlight moved in a soft square across the table, slowly warming the map Derek and I had left open like a page the valley had written for us. I traced the inked ridge with a fingertip and felt steadier than I had in months. The night had not solved everything, but it had taught the room how to breathe. I found Aunt Mara on the porch, shelling peas as if every green snap were a prayer for good weather. "They listened," she said without looking at me. "They did," I answered. "And they argued the way people argue when they plan to stay." Her mouth tugged. "Good. Staying is the only kind of power that lasts." Derek arrived with a tin of tea he'd carried himself, no staff shadowing his steps. He set it near the kettle, palms open again, as if my doorway were a border worth honoring. When he smiled at Aunt Mara, something in her shoulders unlocked by a finger's width. That was more useful than any treaty. We took the first patrol together, just the two of us, and the slow hush of morning turning the underbrush silver. He let me set the pace. When we paused to listen, he listened to the same places I did. The dip where a spring braided the roots, the snag high in the fir where hawks like to rest. I respected his silence more than his title. He wasn't here to be louder. He was here to belong. Near the north ridge, a scent cut the air, thin and frightened. We found him in a cradle of bracken, a yearling from a neighboring pack, human-shaped and shivering, ankle-wrapped in a trap's cruel metal smile. He tried to bolt when he saw us, pried a wild thing beneath his skin. "Easy," I murmured, crouching until the ferns made a little room around my knees. "You're safe. We'll free you and send word home." The boy's jaw worked. "Can't pay," he muttered. I thought you'd charge a border fee for blood." I shook my head. "Not today." Derek knelt opposite me, moving slow enough to be read like a calm story. He didn't touch the trap until the boy nodded. When he did, he wrapped his handkerchief around the cold black teeth, as if even metal deserved to be treated with care before being broken. The spring gave with a dull sigh. The boy's breath hitched, then steadied. "We have salve in the medkit," Derek said quietly, glancing to my pack. He was asking, not telling. I handed it to him, and he waited for me to open it, for my hand to find the right jar first. A small thing. It felt like a bridge. We escorted the yearling to the old hunter's trail, the one that ran safest back toward his territory. Before we let him go, I tied a strip of my braid's ribbon around his wrist, a signal our healers use when they pass through another pack's land. "Permission folded into cloth. You tell your alpha I expect the trap's gone by moonrise," I said gently. "If humans set them, we'll help you deal. If not, we'll help you remember how we hunt without cruel hands." The boy swallowed and nodded so hard his hair fell into his eyes. He limped away lighter than he'd arrived. When the trees closed again, Derek exhaled. "You didn't ask who he belonged to," he said. "He belonged to pain," I replied. "That's enough to know for a first decision." He considered that, then reached into his jacket and took out a small leather case. Inside lay a signet I'd seen stamped on half the correspondence in the Eastern Territories. He set it in my palm. The gold was warm from his pocket. "My steward will balk," he said lightly. "Let him. This stays with you until the end of the season. If you need winter timber or rations or a dozen trackers to reroute a migration, you sign. No approvals, no performance. Just need." It was his shape of trust, heavy and simple. I closed my fingers over it and felt the pulse in my wrist return to a calmer rhythm. Back at the house, the elders gathered again, smaller circle, warmer eyes. I let them see the signet. No triumph, only the quiet of a door I could open when snow made the roads mean. Elder Rowan fingered the edge of the map and nodded, as if an old song had found its right key. He still looked at Derek as if measuring the worth of a load of stone, but the arithmetic was beginning to favor us after the talk. When voices thinned and dusk began its soft work, I led Derek to the grove behind the smokehouse, where our pack keeps its prayer ropes. We tie wishes there with cedar twine, births, names, safe crossings. Wind reads them for us when we're tired. "This is where we bring what we can't carry alone," I told him. "You don't have to believe anything to be allowed." He didn't reach for the twine right away. He watched the ropes sway until even watching became a kind of reverence. Then he took a strand, tied one careful knot, and didn't tell me what it was for. I didn't ask. I tied mine for the boy on the ridge and for the elder's knees in bad weather. For my wolf's quiet, which comes and goes. On the way back we walked past Flynn's porch. He stood with Juliet and the baby, twilight settling on their shoulders like a shawl. Flynn gave Derek the kind of nod men trade when the world has stopped being theoretical. Juliet handed me a jar of elderflower syrup and said nothing about the bracelet. The baby yawned with his whole face. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen a yawn without feeling tired. Night cooled the valley in blue. We built a small fire by the east watch, not for warmth so much as for company. The flames held themselves politely, throwing just enough light to turn our breath into a pale ribbon. I cleaned my blade by habit, He turned the signet's empty case in his palm, as if learning its weight without the ring. "When I was 12, I said, surprising myself. "I followed my mother up the South Ridge in a storm. She told me there are two ways to lead. One is to make yourself a wall. The other is to make yourself a path. The first looks stronger. The second goes farther." He watched the fire. "My father preferred walls," he said softly. "He said paths made people think they were allowed to wander. And what did you think?" "I thought wandering and leaving are different," he said, and the admission loosened something in my chest. I wish I had told him that sooner. The embers settled with the small sigh of hot things, making peace with cool air. For a while we didn't talk. We let owls do the speaking. When the watch changed, we didn't move. Flynn and Juliet passed without breaking the quiet, the way family learns to pass when sleep is a guest you don't want to startle. "Thank you for the signet," I said at last. "And for waiting for me to open my own medkit." He smiled into the dark. "Thank you for the ribbon and the rope." We let the words be equal. I tipped my head back and watched one star refuse to flicker. We had a dozen hard tasks waiting, a trapline to dismantle, an elder's letter to answer, a border to teach not to bruise, but they all felt like the kind of work hands know how to learn. When we finally stood, the night had cooled our voices into something restful. We walked the last stretch without thinking about where to put our feet. That's another kind of trust, the oldest kind. You move beside someone, and the ground behaves itself. I slept easily, the signet tucked in a dish beside my bed, the scent of cedar still in my hair, the fire's glow still held behind my eyes. For the first time since the council began counting down my months, I met the dark like a friend who came to sit, not a debt collector. The wind changed at noon, slipping down from the pass, with the clean chill of snow that hadn't fallen yet. I felt it at the edge of my jaw before the sentries called, an old habit, listening first with bone. By the time the horn sounded, we were already walking toward the south road. Boots quiet in the pine duff, a narrow ribbon of dust lifting around our ankles like a tame ghost. They came in a line of polished trucks that looked wrong in the trees, chrome flashing where green should live. Victor stood in the first open door, coat immaculate, smile the kind you offer a camera. Behind him, 2 wolves I didn't know, and 3 men who smelled of oil and iron and something too sharp to be only fear. Alpha Wilder. Victor inclined his head, measuring me as if I were a bid. "We've brought neighbors. They claim the traps are lawful. Seasonal culling, they say." I took in the men's eyes, tired, flinty, not cruel so much as cornered. Poverty leaves a different scent than malice. Derek stopped half a step behind my shoulder, where I could feel him and still see around him. Protective, not possessive. A line I wanted to honor. "This is our boundary," I said gently. "Our game." Young. One of the men, older, face a map of sun and old strain, shifted his hat in his hands. "Ma'am, the company said permits were good. We don't want trouble." "You won't have it," I told him. "You'll have a meal and a map and work that doesn't break the forest's back." Victor laughed softly, as if I'd made a joke. "Charity is charming, Lyra, but commerce is the language that lasts." "Language is plural," I said. "Ours has room." I stepped past him before the moment grew sharp. We walked to the nearest snare together, the spring wire loop still singing with the panic it had held. "Watch," I said, not to shame them, only to show. I pressed my boot to the anchor, breathed once, and let the catch ease in my palm. Metal slackened with a tiny sigh, almost a relief. Derek crouched opposite me, his hands steady, gloved against the chill. He didn't need to take the coil from me when I straightened. He did anyway, as one carries a heavy bowl because the person who stirred it has already given enough. We gave the men bread and hot broth from the outdoor kitchen, steam lifting like mercy. Elder Rowan spread the greater map on a tailgate and drew his finger along a creek line, offering winter salvage work where the wind had brought down furs. "No poaching," he said, soft as snowfall. "No teething steel in our grass. You come sign with me tomorrow." The oldest man nodded slowly, as if the ground under his boots had decided not to tilt. The youngest kept swallowing, as if he had almost said sorry, and didn't yet know how. Victor watched the exchange with a bored grace that was not quite as careless as he meant it to be. "You make enemies by telling them no," he said. "I make neighbors by giving them a better yes," I replied. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Comet brief. Then he flicked an invisible thread from his cuff. "As you wish, Alpha. You always did prefer the scenic route." He turned to Derek. "And you, Westwood? How is the view from second place?" Derek didn't bristle. He didn't bite. He let the insult travel past like a draft under a door, not worth the wood to stop. "Excellent," he said mildly. "Turns out the scenic route gets you home. It should have been nothing. It felt like a stitch pulled through cloth without tearing it. The quiet repair of an old seam." Victor smiled with all his teeth and left before the forest could judge him for it, when the trucks had gone and the road remembered how to breathe. Derek and I walked the trapline anyway, more ceremony than necessity. He let his knuckles brush mine once, a bell rung with 2 fingers, no demand in it. With each empty loop we removed, the trees seemed to let another inch of their shoulders drop. By twilight the meadow had folded itself back into the usual green. We carried the coiled wire to the barn, where Flynn was building a makeshift hoop for tool storage out of old fence and stubborn optimism. He raised an eyebrow at the pile and whistled low. "Enough to knit a winter of bad choices. We'll turn it into trellises," I said. "Come spring, Juliet will have beans for a small army." Flynn grinned, then aimed his grin at Derek. "You hungry?" "Always," Derek said, gaze cutting to me for permission before he stole one of the biscuits cooling on the sill. He ate it like a man who'd earned more hunger than he'd admitted, crumbs catching on his lip until I brushed them away without thinking. The touch startled us both. All at once the room had fewer edges. We ate late, around a table that had learned 100 names before ours. The arguments were soft and useful, the best kind, picking at patrol routes and winter salt, steady as knitting. When the elders drifted to their porches and Flynn lumbered off with the last pot to soak, the house exhaled. The lamps gentled themselves. "Walk?" Derek asked, voice a warm shawl he held out, not draped without asking. We took the east path where the meadow met a thin braid of river. The moon had not yet risen. The stars did a good job pretending to be enough. The night smelled of wood smoke and frost and a sweetness under the cold, like the first bite of a new apple. He didn't reach for me until the willow shadows swallowed the last flicker of houselight. Then he only offered his hand, palm up, as if asking a creak for a stone. I set my fingers there and felt his breath adjust, small and honest. We stood like that for a while. No rush, no audience, letting the quiet learn our names. "I keep trying to give you the right kind of strong," he said finally, voice low. "It turns out you already have it. I'm learning where mine fits." "It fits beside," I said. "Sometimes behind, sometimes in front. Mostly beside," he nodded. The river moved like thinking. When he kissed me, it wasn't a declaration. It was a good night said correctly, the way you tuck a blanket so it won't wake all the hours that follow. His mouth was warm, careful, certain only in the question of it. I answered with a yes that felt older than speech. There were no fireworks, only the softer, better thing, the moths approving, the willow leaves applauding the light with the faintest hands. He didn't hurry. I didn't either. The world gathered itself into a small circle. We could keep warm with our breathing. "Let me know if you want to stop," he murmured against my jaw. The words shaped like a promise he'd keep, even if it pulled him apart. I did not want to stop. I wanted to stand there until the stars decided to rest. I wanted to know how he tasted when winter first kissed the air. I wanted what was simple and allowed. His hand steady on my back, mine in his hair, the river pretending not to watch. We walked back when the cold began its careful work on our fingertips. The house met us with lamplight that had learned to look like moon. He paused at my door, the old wood smooth beneath his knuckles. "Good night, Alpha," he said, the respect in it a warmer blanket than anything on the bed. "Good night." "Derek," I said, and the way his name sat in my mouth felt like home. Behind the window, the hills lay down into their dignified dark. Between one breath and the next, the valley remembered how to sleep, And so did I, like a river finds its bank, like a lantern finds its low flame, like a wolf who has finished counting the shadows and found none of them hungry. Morning drifted in on a thin veil of fog, the kind that made every cedar bead with light. I woke to the hush a pack makes when it is trying not to worry. Pots clinked softer, boots set down gentler. The bond hummed low and warm along my throat, steady as a hand on my shoulder. Derek's scent lingered at the threshold. Smoke, pine, something bright beneath it, leaving the space between us full instead of empty. Word of the trapline had travelled faster than the wind. By breakfast, a courier from the regional council stood on our porch, coat shiny with road dust, posture too stiff to belong to a wolf who trusted his feet. He bowed, eyes on the papers in his hands rather than on me. Alpha Wilder. A petition has been filed. Allegations of unlawful interference with licensed harvesters and of endangering interpack stability. His voice wavered only once, on the word endangering, as if it tasted wrong. I took the envelope. The wax seal cracked with a polite little pop, like a seed beginning. Victor's name sat on the first line, neat as a blade. Hearing in 3 nights, neutral ground, mandatory attendance. A challenge disguised as procedure. The old way, wearing a new suit, Flynn leaned against the doorframe, jaw set. Say the word, Lyra. We can post extra sentries, double the patrols. Make it clear this isn't the day to pick a fight. We will, I said. But the first line is still neighbor, not enemy. I looked at the courier until he remembered he had a mouth for more than messages. Have you eaten? He hadn't. We fed him anyway. Respect isn't a favor. It's the floor. After he left, I spread a map across the big table and invited everyone who needed to touch it. Elders, hunters, Juliet with her quiet wisdom. 2 apprentices who had earned the right to listen. Derek took the corner nearest the stove, not at the head, not insisting on the weight of the room. His eyes asked before his hands moved. I let them move when it made sense. Growth sometimes felt like that. The pack learning my voice didn't mean it had forgotten its own. We marked routes and paired experience with eagerness. I split the night watch into overlapping braids, no single thread carrying the whole pull. To Juliet, I gave the work that looks like care on the surface and like strategy underneath, pulling our human neighbors closer with wood orders and winter pantry trades, so anyone who came to take could see a wider circle around us. By midday, the wind had sharpened, and with it came the sort of trouble that mistakes itself for warning. A sigil burned into a birch at the north boundary, fresh char still breathing, meant to startle pups and rattle elders. Not a threat. A test. I walked out with Flynn and 2 adolescents who needed to learn how to be brave without showing off. Derek came because that is what protection feels like when it isn't trying to be ownership. The birch stood patient under its wound. I laid my palm to the blackened mark, listening for the part of the story that wasn't loud. Carved with a heater coil, I said finally. Not claws, not ours. The boys looked a little disappointed. It is easier to be angry at a stranger than at the idea of an idea. Leave it, Flynn asked. Erase it, I answered, and plant a better picture. We scored the bark back to clean curl, then pressed a paste of sap and chewed pine to seal. I tied a strand of red wool around the trunk, the color that says alive, the color that says you were seen. Derek's hand lingered near mine, not touching until I turned my wrist. Even then, just a brush, like breath. Before dusk, the forest gave us another ask. A cry thin as fishing line. We found a yearling deer with her leg in a rusted clamp, not one of ours, old metal with a hinge, like a bad memory. She trembled herself into exhaustion when she saw us. I spoke with my belly instead of my teeth. Flynn kept his body small. Derek knelt so slowly, the night had time to approve. We worked the jaws apart, while Juliet murmured a song that had once been a prayer to a river. The clamp let go. The doe stumbled, paused, and breathed in our direction as if scent could be thanks. Then she slipped into the understory and didn't look back. You do this, Derek said softly as we gathered the ruined iron. You make the world want to stay. I try to give it good reasons, I said. Staying is a choice. Evening fell like a shawl. We ate in shifts. Laughter kept low out of respect for the day. Afterward, I met with Elder Rowan to draft the reply the council would file. Clear, calm, full of dates and maps, and the names of human foresters willing to stand alongside ours. I asked Derek to review the language. He didn't add teeth. He added light, the way good windows turn a room into a place rather than a box. When he pushed the paper back, his eyes said more than his notes. "You are leading. I am with you." That was the sentence I carried up the stairs. Sleep didn't find me right away. I walked the porch and counted the silhouettes of spruce, listening to the ridge breathe. Somewhere down in the flats, a truck engine paused, considered darkness, then changed its mind. Somewhere nearer, an owl remarked on mice, as if they were weather. The pack's heartbeat ran under it all, steady as coals. When the horn sounded twice, short, controlled, not an alarm but a summons, I was already lacing my boots. The South Meadow again. This time, the newcomers were young and shaking. Two boys, whose bravado had been stolen by the dark. One held a coil of wire like a trophy. The other had a pocket knife he didn't seem to know how to close. "Put it away," I said, not loud. "You don't need a blade for talking." They did, shoulders slumping in the way pride does when it realizes it can stand without armor. They belonged to a small camp at the old mill. Seasonal crews, with no winter line, the kind of living that makes a person say yes to bad offers. They'd been dared to lift steel from the wrong border. If they brought it back, someone would pay them. If they didn't, someone would laugh. I didn't shame them. Shame is a poor teacher. I asked their names and their mothers and the name of the creek they drank from. I told them what wire does to wolf and deer and the ankles of men who want to keep walking home. I offered a job no one had dared to imagine offered to them. "Dawn," I said. "Barn. We're restringing fence with something kinder. You'll be fed first, paid at lunch, and no one will be allowed to make you small while you learn." They stared like I'd spoken weather into coins. Derek stood a pace behind my right shoulder, a pillar that didn't need to be announced. When the boys left, Flynn blew out a breath that seemed to take the night with it. "You're changing the story." "No," I said, surprised by the softness of my own voice. "I'm remembering the older one." By the time the moon lifted, the valley had put its worries down. I found Derek at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled, working sap from his palms with salt and patience. He looked up with that half-smile that felt like a porch light. "Your hands," he said, reaching carefully. The pads of my fingers ached where the clamp had bitten them. He dried them with a linen towel that had seen more winters than either of us, then massaged the salve Juliet swears by into each knuckle as if there were a ceremony for being this gentle. I didn't realize how much I'd been bracing until I felt myself stop. "The council," he murmured, not a question. "I'll go," I said. "We'll go. I'll bring the map and the names. I'll bring what we did today, not what they are afraid we might do tomorrow. And I'll bring silence when talking would make it worse," he answered. "And teeth when patience would be a lie." I laughed, the kind of small laugh that loosens the chest. "Mostly beside," I reminded him. "Mostly beside," he agreed, and kissed my brow with the reverence people save for doorways in old cities and the soft fur between a pup's ears. I slept as if the house itself had tucked me in. Dreams came slow and kind, red wool on a healed tree, a doe walking without flinching, boys arriving at dawn with wire they've decided belongs to fences, not throats. In the early hours, when stars put themselves away, I woke once to the soft weight of a blanket pulled higher, and a presence settling into the chair by my door like a promise kept. Outside, frost drew lace on the rails. Inside, I learned again how a pack rests when it knows its own name. The river didn't hurry. Neither did I. The night before the hearing came in like a bowl of milk, tipped slowly over the hills, bright pooling in the low places, dark kept where spruce made their own weather. We gathered at the old stones because some things are better said to granite than to paper. Breath made little clouds. The red wool I had tied on the healed birch rode my wrist like a thread the moon herself had spun. We didn't speak at first. Boots scuffed frost. Someone set a lantern near the path and then thought better, cupping the flame so it wouldn't compete with the sky. The stones had heard vows long before any of us had names. They could hold one more. Derek came without a coat even though the air bit. He stood beside me instead of half a step in front, the way he does when he understands that his shape is shelter. His scent was steadier now, winter smoke and pine resin, the metallic edge gone to a memory. It made something in me loosen that I hadn't realized was clenched. Elder Rowan laid the rusted clamp we'd taken from the dough on a flat rock, not as a trophy, as a promise. "We'll have the smith bend this into gate hinges," she said. "Harm to hinge. That is one way to read the world. Another is to melt it," Flynn muttered. "Another is to teach the hands that set it how to tie knots that hold without biting," Juliet added. Soft as snow, we circled the stones like hours around a clock. When I lifted my palm, the pack's breathing matched it, the way heartbeats sometimes do when they share a roof. "We are a pack of borders," I said. "Forests that end at roads. Fences that keep cattle in and wolves out until someone forgets which side they're on. Tomorrow, we go where voices carry and tempers try to wear nice shoes. Tonight, we remember what our teeth are for." The wind tugged at my hair and then settled as if it had found a place to listen. "Oaths," Rowan said. Her word hung in the cold like a bell. We made them simple on purpose. Simple breaks less. I pledged to hold our line with open hands before we close our fists. To feed pups and elders before pride. To guard the humans who drink from our creeks. Not because they belong to us, but because we share a mouth with the river. To ask for apology before we ask for blood. To use teeth only when apology is refused, and even then, under the moon's eye. One by one, voices followed. Flynn vowed to train without humiliation. Juliet vowed to remind us to sleep when storms made us forget. 2 apprentices vowed to learn the names of the plants that heal, not just the ones that burn. The promises stacked like kindling, each small and true, the kind that keeps longer than the kind that gleams. When it came to Derek, there was a pause that felt like breath held on a winter dare. He looked at Rowan, asking permission without saying it, and she tipped her chin toward the northern star, as if to say, "You have been seen in worse lights than this." "I don't ask to be your alpha," he said, voice pitched for stones more than ears. "Not your savior, not your shadow over the gate. I ask to be your beside. I will stand where danger looks sideways. I will carry wood when words are enough and water when they are not. I will keep my hands out of your reins and my back under your weight. If I am ever tempted to make you smaller so I can feel big, may the moon make me honest first. It wasn't flowery. It didn't need to be. The stones held it. The air held it. I felt the bond hum lower, more content, the way a pup's chest does when it finally finds sleep against your knee. A soft tread approached the circle then, careful not to break it. Leather, not paw. I didn't turn until the newcomer chose to show herself. Kate Winters stepped from the shadows with 2 wolves flanking her like parentheses. She wore her alpha like a coat she'd tailored herself. "I didn't write," she said, a smile quick and wry. It felt like a night for doors, not letters. "Welcome," I said, and meant it. "You do not waste moonlight on old rivalries when the ground wants to thaw." She glanced at the clamp on the stone, at the red wool on my wrist, at Derek, where he stood easy and proud in equal measure. Her eyes warmed. "I heard about your petition," she continued. "I also heard which human company has been donating hardware to boys who haven't learned what a winter costs." My beta pulled the filings. She produced a folded paper from the inside of her coat, the ink neat, the numbers uglier than teeth. "A name you'll recognize," she added. "Not Victor's on the line this time. His cousin's shell." The twist of it landed gently, like a snowflake that still manages to tell you about the storm it belongs to. "It wasn't a knife. It was a liver. We'll lay it before the council," I said. "But not like a trap, like a candle. In rooms like that, flame can look like accusation. It can also look like a way to see." Kate nodded. "There's another thing," she said, eyes tipping toward the moon. The hearing site claims neutrality, but they've set a requirement for a witness of the between. Someone neither fully wolf nor fully human, bound to our world and standing slightly outside it. The old treaties used them, when tempers couldn't decide whose language to use. Her gaze shifted to Derek. The night made his irises bright as glacier melt. "He qualifies," she said, "if he wants it." Everything in me went still and bright at once. Not fear, recognition. The curse that had tried to turn him into an absence had made him, instead, into a bridge. Derek didn't answer immediately. He looked at me as if the question had been placed in my palm, not his. I took a breath that tasted like resin and hoarfrost. "Witness is not a throne," I murmured. "It's a doorway. If you stand in it, you do it for the world, not for me." "For us," he said quietly, and that was close enough to the truth to make the stones approve. He stepped toward the center rock. Rowan pricked his finger with a thorn, no dramatics, just a pin of red, and pressed it to the old spiral carved there by wolves who measured time with antler growth and snowpack instead of calendars. My blood joined a moment later, 2 small drops on old granite, turning dark and ordinary, as every vow worth keeping does. We sealed the circle with breath, not with howls. Even the pups kept their voices tucked inside, as if the forest itself had put a finger to its lips. Above us, the moon slid a fraction toward its own private horizon. Nothing cracked. Nothing burst. The only thing that changed was how the air felt when it touched skin. On the walk back, Kate fell in step with me long enough to bump her shoulder to mine. "You're doing it," she said. "The thing we all talk about and few attempt. Making power quiet. It's the only way I sleep," I confessed. "Then keep doing it," she said, and peeled away into the dark, with her wolves moving like commas around a sentence that hadn't finished yet. We banked the house fires to red eyes. I signed the last of the copies for the council, then tucked them into a leather folio that smelled like the first winter I ever got right. The boys from the mill would come at dawn to meet Juliet at the barn. The smith would arrive by noon to turn the clamp into hinges. My pack would wake to oats and the kind of laughter that doesn't ask for a reason. The council would convene tomorrow night beneath chandeliers and stern portraits, and I would carry the map and the names and the quiet. In our room, Derek unspooled a length of red wool and tied it around my wrist with the care people reserve for fragile heirlooms. He pressed his mouth to the knot as if it were a seal. "Beside," he said again, like an oath that preferred to be spoken in kitchens instead of halls. "Beside," I answered, sleep already moving through my bones like warm water. Wind traced the eaves. Somewhere an owl counted the cold on its feathers. The house settled the way old houses do when they agree with what you've asked of them. I curled beneath the quilt and let the moon do what it came to do, keep watch while the living rest. When dreams found me, they did not argue. They brought the stone spiral and the hinge, the boys showing up with their hands out and their eyes bright, and the council table already scattered with candles no one claimed to have lit. The night held all of it without effort, and I slept as if the world had exhaled, and we, for once, had remembered to breathe with it. Morning came slow and pale, a clean page sliding under the night. The frost on the pasture looked like lace set out to dry. When I opened the door, the cold bit my cheeks and then forgave me. Derek carried cedar rounds to the smithy, sleeves pushed to his elbows, breath feathering in the air. The old clamp lay on the anvil like a bad word someone had said too often. We warmed the forge until it hummed in the bones. Iron changed its mind under heat. It reddened, softened, forgot what it had been told to be. The smith turned it with steady hands, bent harm toward hinge, coaxed a curve where once there had only been bite. Sparks lifted and drifted like fireflies that had overslept. When the pins were formed, we quenched them in snow melt and ash. Steam bloomed quick and clean. I set one new hinge on my palm and felt a strange lightness, as if the metal had left some of its old story behind with the smoke. "Bring it to the hearing," Rowan said, voice low. "Not as proof. As invitation." A truck eased up the lane while the forge still held its glow. A woman stepped out with a ranger patch on her sleeve and a face that knew wind. She took off her hat before she reached the yard. "Mara Hargreave," she said, offering a hand. "State Forestry. Off duty if anyone asks." Her mouth tipped wry. "On duty where it matters." She unfurled old maps at our kitchen table, paper browned at the creases, ink like thin rivers. Corridors stitched the slopes in dotted lines. "The migration paths are older than our roads," she said. "We can sign them, lift fences 3 hands higher, right where the herds lean, add cattle guards here and here so wolves don't mistake pens for permission." She slid a folder across the grain. Receipts, brand lists, a quiet confession written in numbers. "Some of the hardware started with a paper company," she added. "I can testify if you need a human voice the council will hear without bristling. You'd stand with us." I asked. "I'd stand for the valley," she said. "Which means with you today." Juliet brought tea and saved us from talking too fast. Derek listened, that witness stillness already finding its shape in him. When he traced a route with one fingertip, the room felt balanced, like a lantern hung true. By noon, the yard filled with boots and soft apologies. 2 boys I didn't know kept their hands jammed in their pockets until one blurted, "We didn't know what it did to deer. We were told it was for coyotes." He looked 15 and miserable. "We repair what we can," I said. "We learn names. We carry buckets and posts until our backs remember the lesson." Juliet signed them up for clinic duty and fencing days. Their shoulders dropped, not with defeat, but with belonging to the work. Flynn found me on the porch after, his gaze a steady shore. "I should have stood closer," he said, "no ornament on it." "You're here now," I answered. The words landed simple and right. He leaned his arm against mine like brothers do when no one is watching. Kate Winters arrived with the afternoon, her wolves riding the tree line like a promise. She brought copies of filings and a baker's bag that smelled like sugar and orange peel. "Bribes," she said, deadpan. "For council stomachs that listen better when their hands are busy." We laughed, and some old edge between us cracked like river ice in thaw. She'd come armed with more than pastries. "Carpenters," she said. "If your folk want help raising the corridor gates, consider it a preemptive treaty. I'm tired of pretending our borders aren't stitched from the same thread." The hinge caught the light on the table. Kate touched it with 2 fingers. "Reverent." "Ah, that's how," she murmured. Not louder, truer. In the barn, we fitted the new pins to the big south gate so the yearlings wouldn't bruise their hips when they rushed the first green. The smell of hay and warm animal turned the work into a kind of hymn. Derek tested the swing once, twice, until the wood moved like it was glad. Ryder came up the drive just before dusk, coat unbuttoned, grin crooked. He and Derek stood a long minute shoulder to shoulder without speech. Then Ryder shoved him lightly, eyes bright with relief he tried to hide. "Heard you're going to stand between," he said. "About time you used those stubborn feet for a threshold." "Beside," Derek answered, and that made even Ryder's mouth soften. We packed, at last. Not finery, maps, a coil of red wool, the hinge wrapped in cloth, a small tin of salve Juliet tucked in my bag, with a look that could fix stitches from across a room. "For their sore tempers," she said and smiled. The council house sat where the river made a slow silver question around a rise. Windows watched the water the way elders watch a story find its end. We climbed the stone steps as the first lamps were lit, and candlelight met us like a quiet choir. Inside, wood smelled of polish and winter coats. Portraits lined the hall, all stern eyes and stiff collars from years when softness had to hide. I saw a girl in one frame, hair braided like mine, gaze almost mischievous, as if she had whispered a joke to the paint and it had kept it. A clerk showed us to a side room with a couch that held you without asking and a pitcher beaded over with cold. Someone had thought to lay out small blankets the color of lichen. I ran a hand over the weave and felt the valley hand itself to me. Rowan went to sign our arrival. Gate slipped away to walk the perimeter, her wolves 2 shadows on either side. Ryder vanished on an errand that felt like protection. The building breathed around us, old timber remembering storms and songs. Derek stood at the window and watched the river think. He looked back at me with that expression he saves for thresholds, more wonder than worry. "If they ask the river," he said softly, "it will tell the truth." "We brought one," I said, setting the hinge in the pool of lamplight as if it were a candle. "We'll hand them both." He came to me then, all the space between our shapes choosing to be small. He tied a fresh loop of red wool over my wrist, double knot, palms warming the skin there. His mouth brushed the wool as if sealing wax, and then settled against my temple like a breath. "We'll go in quiet," I said. "We'll come out together," he answered. Beyond the window, the moon's reflection broke and mended with the current. A white coin the water kept passing back to itself. Footsteps went soft in the corridor. Voices blurred to a hush and stayed kind. The hinge cooled under my hand until it felt like a door waiting to be named. We lay down for a little while in the good tired way work allows. Cloth whispered. The room held us like a hand. I counted breaths until they forgot they were being counted. Somewhere a bell marked the hour without scolding it. The river slowed its thinking to match the dark. Sleep came without teeth, and I let it take me. Curled toward the steady warmth at my back, the red wool a small flame at my wrist, the hearing still a horizon we didn't have to reach yet. The knock that woke us was soft, like someone tapping the edge of a dream. I sat up slow, the red wool warm against my wrist, Derek's hand a quiet weight at my hip until he remembered himself and let go. Candles guided us down the hall. Polished floorboards held the echo of other nights, other arguments, other agreements that had learned to breathe. The chamber opened like a throat, the long table set with pitchers of water and bowls of river stones. Elders waited with their winter faces on. Rowan stood at my shoulder. Gate slid in on my left, a cold, clean scent of spruce trailing her. Mara took the end of the table where the maps could breathe. Ryder leaned against a post as if he'd grown there, eyes on the whole room at once. The chairwoman asked for beginning words. Her voice was linen ironed smooth. I spoke first, because that is what an alpha does when her people are the ones in the picture. I kept it simple. Pasture and wintering ground. Elk that broke on old fences. A clamp that bit and would not let go. Mara laid down the corridors like threads. Dotted lines crossing ridges and draws, old as hoof and moon. She showed where the gates should lift, where signs should speak in plain symbols, where light should turn from glare to amber so night would still belong to night. She did not scold. She placed 2 boys stood when called. They were all bones and apology. They said they'd been paid in cash and told coyotes were the problem, not deer. They handed up a receipt book with pages still warm from being torn. No one hissed. The chairwoman thanked them for bringing truth while it still had footprints. I unwrapped the hinge. The cloth caught on a burr and then let go, the way a hard story sometimes does when you find the right corner. I held the metal so the lamplight could show the curve, the softened teeth, the way harm had been bent into useful swing. For a breath, the room was only breath. This, I said, came from a trap on our south line. We heated it until it remembered how to open. We brought it as an invitation. Derek stepped forward without hurry. He did not try for thunder. He named what he had seen on patrol, edges where prey ran themselves thin. He named the ranchers who already mended with us, and the 2 who hadn't yet but could, if given a bridge instead of a wall. When he spoke, the space between sentences felt like room you could set a cup in. An elder with a hawk's nose folded his hands. "And what do you ask in return, Alpha Westwood?" His tone had a blade tucked inside it. Derek did not touch the title. "A witness seat," he said. "One that anyone may stand in, even if they carry no last name the council recognizes. A place to hold the story from the middle, not only from one bank or the other." The hawk-nosed elder looked at his own reflection in his water. "You asked to change the way the river is heard. I asked to hear it fully," Derek said. He tipped his head toward me, a small vow. Beside her, not above, not instead. Flynn cleared his throat in that way he gets when he is proud and doesn't want to cause a scene. Juliet pressed the tin of salve into the clerk's hands without explaining why. Gate produced her pastries like a tactic and earned 3 quiet smiles from the sternest men at the table. We read the terms. Gates at the crossings marked on Mara's maps. Hardware exchanged by spring, traps dismantled by the men who'd placed them, with tea served after so hands remembered hospitality. Patrol schedules braided so wolves and wardens shared the same night. A bright ribbon on the south gate when calves were fresh, a sign to remind the valley to lower its voice. Who will guarantee compliance? Someone asked, soft and wary. I will, I said. We will, Derek said at the same time, and the small tremor of it steadied my bones. The chairwoman looked from me to him to the hinge and back. And if there is a breach? Then we come here again, I said. Not with teeth, with work, with names, and with witnesses who saw the middle and not just the edge. The hawk-nosed elder opened his mouth to argue and found Mara already there, offering a photograph of hoofprints splayed against wire. This one limped away, she said. She will carry that posture 4 winters. We can teach our fences not to make that shape. Silence did its useful work. The river sounded close even through stone. Snow let go of a branch outside and made a hush you could feel. All right, the chairwoman said at last. Let us put it to the stones. One by one, elders lifted a river stone and set it in one of 2 bowls. The sound was simple. Stone meeting stone. Choice made like weather, without trumpet or drum. I counted without meaning to. When the last hand drew back, you could see the river's idea of us passed, the clerk said, surprised, trying not to show. By a margin that will read as grace in the book. I did not cheer. You do not shout when a sleepwalker reaches the bed. You lay a palm on the quilt and let the night remember it is gentle. Derek's fingers found the red wool at my wrist and rested there as if the knot had been tied into him as well. The chairwoman stood. She took the hinge with both hands and held it as if it were a candle. We accept your invitation, she said, and we will expect you to keep inviting us. We will, I said, and felt the truth of it travel the line between my pulse and his. We left the chamber as we had entered it. Quiet feet, easy shoulders. The hall seemed warmer. Portrait eyes looked less like judgment and more like relief. Outside, the river took the moon and made 2 moons and then 1 again. In the courtyard, I paused under the linden. Derek stopped because I did. He set his palm on the tree, old bark rough under his skin. Climaxes are supposed to be louder, he murmured, smiling like a boy who had found a hidden path. We're not telling that kind of story, I said. No, he agreed. We're telling the kind that sleeps. He slid his arm around me, and I let my weight lean into that curve. Somewhere on the ridge our wolves answered one another, not a war cry, just a check-in, a counting of heads. Lanterns bobbed along the lane, where our people walked back toward the wagons, talking about buckets and boards, and who would bring stew to the work site. We stood there long enough for the stars to deepen. Breath made small ghosts in the cold, and then made none at all. When at last we turned for the inn across the square, the door opened on its own weather. A hearth the size of a small room, a quilt hung for drying with someone's child's handprints pressed in flour along the edge. The innkeeper gave us keys without asking for money yet, the way neighbors do when the road has given you its whole back. In our room, we did not plan. Plans could wait for morning. I unlaced my boots. He folded my coat over the chair. We slid beneath a blanket that remembered sheep and dye and the woman who had tied off, each fringe with a knot you could trust. I closed my eyes and saw the hinge, resting in the chairwoman's hands like a small sun. I felt the river decide to keep us. I felt the red wool steady against my skin, the bond between us, a quiet, contented thread that hummed like full bees in summer. Sleep came like a tide that knows the shore by heart. It rose, it held, it set me down where I began. We woke late and unhurried, the square outside breathing flour and coffee and the rattle of milk pails. Derek stretched like a cat, and I pretended not to notice the way his contentment warmed the bond and turned my own bones loose. We were not needed anywhere for an hour. The world could wait. It did. By afternoon the valley had gathered again, not for debate this time, but for witnessing. Someone had strung small lanterns along the footbridge, their wicks bobbing in a breeze that smelled of thaw. Children chalked moons on the stones, and a grandmother hummed a tune I did not know, and somehow always had. We walked to the meadow together, our people moving like a tide that preferred gentleness to force. The clearing was dressed in simple things. Bowls of river water, a broom laid across 2 stones for sweeping yesterday's grit off tomorrow's floor. The hinge we had carried rested on a wool square beside a coil of scarlet thread. Rowan kept the drum close and silent, his palms warming the skin for later. Kate brought a loaf as round as the moon. Ryder stood by the linden pole, with a look that carried jokes he would not tell today. The chairwoman's voice found us without raising itself. "The council has done its part," she said, palms open. "Now comes the part no quorum can touch." Derek looked at me, and for once his smile did not try to distract or dazzle. It only asked. I nodded because the answer had long since been given. I stepped forward first. I spoke about the bargain we had made with our fear and the better one we had chosen with our courage. I said the names that had walked us here, Mara for the maps, Flynn for the first hard truths, Juliet for her bright, stubborn tenderness, Kate for sweetness at midnight, Ryder for the mirror he held whether or not we asked. I said the river's name and let the air answer with its wet hush. Then I turned to Derek and said his. "I chose you when it was easy, in rooms full of glass and music," I told him. "I chose you when it turned hard, at the cabin where the clock had already said no. I choose you now, when it is ordinary. I will keep choosing." He did not glance at the crowd. He did not need their weather to make his own. "I chose you when I was a fool pretending not to be afraid," he said. "I choose you now that I know how fear becomes a house if you let it. I will keep sweeping the threshold." The chairwoman tied the wool to my wrist again, then to his, a simple loop like a lane between fields. "Not to bind," she said, "only to remind." She touched the hinge. Open and open and open. We drank from the same bowl, and the water tasted of tin and thaw and the first green blade buried under last snow. Rowan gave the drum a pulse so slow, the heart mimicked it without thinking. We did not make oaths with thunder. We let our breath meet until the bond hummed low and steady, the sort of hum that makes hounds sleep and lamps burn even. Someone called for the shift, soft and teasing, as if asking the moon to show an ankle. We obliged carefully without pageantry. I slipped into fur like a remembered language. Derek followed, his change a long, easy ripple that made a few elders turn away to hide their relief. When our paws touched the glade, we didn't run. We walked the circle, shoulder to shoulder, showing the old magic the shape we had made of it. Children laughed. Someone's baby hiccuped. The world declined to end. Dusk folded the meadow, and faces became constellations of lantern light. We ate the round loaf, and someone poured cider that had wintered well. The hinge passed hand to hand, and came back warmer than it left. When the little ones grew heavy, we sent them home with pockets full of bread heels and flat river stones that would one day clutter their shelves. It is not a bad thing to trip on memory. Later, under the linden, the elders pressed the witness token into Derek's palm. Not a medal, not a seal, only a plain wooden disc, sanded smooth and pierced for cord. "For the seat, you asked," the chairwoman said. "Sit in it when others cannot. Call for it when others will not." Derek slid the disc beside the red wool and nodded once. I felt something unclench that he had been pretending didn't ache. We did not win, or conquer, or triumph. We tidied, we laid boards. We wrote down how to call one another when night was colder than expected. It was enough. It was a kind of victory I trusted not to wake ravenous. Weeks layered themselves like quiet quilts. Gates went up where Mara had sketched them. The first elk to find the new passage lifted her head in a slow, regal nod, and then stepped through with her calf tucked neat at her side. The boys who had warmed trap money with their own sleep came to pry the iron jaws apart, and Flynn set the kettle so they would remember small mercies in their hands. Victor sent a letter sealed in nothing, offering a trade that did no harm. I answered with a trade that did good. Some stories do not need more heat than that. Sometimes we woke to the sound of distant hammering and rolled to listen, smiling because you can love a valley most by the noise it makes when it repairs itself. Sometimes we woke to rain and did not get up at once. Derek learned the names of 3 kinds of moss from Juliet and taught 2 of them to the chairwoman's grandson, who decided that being a witness might be as fine as being a warrior. I found that the council's table felt less like stone beneath my palms when I remembered to carry bread. One night, a month after the meadow, I hung the hinge in our entryway on a leather thong, not at eye level, but low enough a child's hand would always find it.
For luck?
Derek asked. For memory, I said, of what we softened and what we guessed right. He kissed the spot between my brows where worry likes to hide and did not ask if I was tired. He already knew I was, and that the good kind of tired needs no cure but quiet. We stood a while in the doorway, watching fog curl up from the river like breath returning to a sleeping house. The lantern at the bridge burned steady. I liked knowing someone had checked its wick. Seasons braided themselves into a rope we could trust. Spring handed the hills to summer. Summer thinned and turned its pockets out for fall. The witness seat filled and emptied, and people who'd never spoken in such rooms learned how to say "I saw" without apology. Our wolves ran together less for war than for inventory, counting calves, counting berries, counting the ways a valley stays itself. We kept choosing. In arguments that ended with soup instead of slammed doors. In patrols that made more conversation than trail. In mornings when we tied the red thread new, because knots wear the way roads do, not from failure but from use. When fear rang the bell, we let it in, gave it a chair at the table, listened until it remembered it had come to help and not to rule. On the first snow of the second winter, we took the long path home. The stars hung close as fruit, and the air tasted like clean iron. Derek's hand found mine in his pocket and stayed there, warm as a small hearth. "It's quiet," he said. "It's safe," I said. "It's both," he decided, and the barn purred its small approval. The way a careful house cat approves a blanket. We slept with the window cracked to hear the river talk to rocks. The hinge on its thong turned slightly in the draught, catching a sliver of starlight and letting it go, catching and letting like breath. Nothing terrible waited at the edge of the dark. Only tomorrow, and the kind of work that leaves good tiredness in your bones. I let the day set me down in its soft place, and felt his breathing match mine, slow and sure. The last thought I kept was simple. We had made a door where there had been an argument. We had learned to open it. We would keep opening it, gently, again and again, until the valley knew that was our way. Sleep took the thought and smoothed it, the way water rounds a stone. The room sighed. The river answered. The night held.